Welcome back to Heart with Abagaba, where we have meaningful conversations that support children, families, and the village that surround them. Today's conversation is especially important for parents, caregivers, and educators who may be wondering, am I missing something, or why is my child struggling despite trying so hard? I'm honored to welcome Dr. Rebecca Troy to the show. Dr. Troy is a mother of two and an expert in educational neuroscience, specializing in dyslexia intervention. She holds a doctorate in education, is a researcher in neuroscience and reading disabilities, and is a national board certified teacher in early and middle literacy. Known for her tenacious yet nurturing approach, Dr. Troy brings advanced evidence-based dyslexia interventions directly into homes, making support accessible and practical for families. Her work has been featured in over 10 publications, including Psychology Today, Women's Journal, and Voyage NY. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Abby Dominguez. This is Heart to Heart with Abagaba podcast, and I'm so glad you're here. I spent over a decade as a nanny and teacher, learning from children and families around the world. Now I bring those lessons to you, heart to heart conversations with people from all walks of life, sharing stories of love, laughter, and resilience that remind us of the power of connection and community. Subscribe today and join our village of heart to heart listeners. Dr. Troy, thank you so much for being here and for the work you do for families. And welcome to Heart with Abagaba. You're my very first guest of the year. Yay! So I want to begin for parents who may be hearing the word dyslexia for the first time. What are some of the early warning signs and symptoms of dyslexia?
Yeah, that's such a great question. First of all, I want to say thanks for having me, and it's exciting to be the first one of 2026. That's awesome.
Yay!
Um, so I think dyslexia has got a lot of confusion around it. I think there are still many people who believe that, that's when you see words backwards or things jump around on the page. And while yes, you can inverse some things, like it's definitely different than a lot of people think. So um, there are some warning signs that I think people should know about, especially as parents. And if you have multiple children and you have a child in your home that's developing, typically it often becomes really, really obvious that something is different. So a couple of the big ones that stick out is if your child is adding letters in or omitting letters that should be there when they're spelling. So spelling is a really great place to kind of see some challenges because, if, for example, the word is yellow and we've missed the vowel sound, we've added in a J that doesn't belong, we've,
Mhm.
maybe skipped the end, that's often an indication that the brain is struggling to connect letters and sounds. So
Right.
that's a pretty common one. Often children who struggle to rhyme words, you can maybe see the same word over and over again, like, gosh, we've practiced this word. It's so simple. And yet they still don't get it on the 200th or 300th time that you've practiced it. So, it's a very obvious disconnect between the child's intelligence and how they're doing with language related things, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
thank you so much for answering that. I was going to ask you, when should parents be concerned and when is it developmentally typical? But you touched on that so clearly. And I know that so many parents are told, just wait. When does waiting help and when does it delay support?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's actually some studies that are coming out now out of Sweden and Finland and other such places, that they're actually testing kids that are within a few days old, they know that there's a history of dyslexia in the family, and they're intervening even as the children are 2, 3, 4, 5 months old, and studying now to see the impact of having a very, very early start. So I think the biggest thing that I've seen in my years of work with this is that the longer that you wait, the more emotional turmoil, the more
Oh,
psychological struggle that exists for the child and for the family. So,
mm,
for example, at the age of 7, kids develop the concept that, they're different than other kids. Like there is this entity that is me and an entity that is somebody else.
right.
And I have a self concept now to recognize that what I might be doing is different than somebody else.
Mhm.
So that makes me feel bad. Maybe other people are making fun of me. Maybe I notice that my skills are not the same as my sibling. And that really starts this negative narrative for the
Mm,
child of like, I can't do this. I'm stupid. I'm never going to get it. I'm dumb. And that just has a lasting negative impact on them. So we do hear that often where people are advised like, oh, it's too early, you could never tell by 7 years old, oh, you need to wait until much later. We do have clients that are at 4 years old and it's very clear that the child has dyslexia, so intervening early makes a whole lot of sense.
I love emphasizing on early intervention. So, what's different about the brain of a person with dyslexia compared to a neurotypical reader?
Yeah. So I'll start with the good parts because I
Yeah.
think that that's often missed.
Mhm.
So, what we know, at least now, is that there are some areas, and a lot of them are in the frontal lobe of the brain, that are extra: creativity, spatial thinking, lateral thinking, problem solving, seeing the big picture. These are all strengths that we've been able to see through brain imaging that are actually happening more for kids with dyslexia. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, right alongside of this difference in language are these gifts. But when we think of the things that are a struggle, there are two key areas of the brain that are different. So one is in the back of the brain where we see. It's called our occipital lobe. And the other one is over our ear in what we call the parietal temporal lobe, where our brain processes sound. So it's quite literally the intersection between letters and sounds in the brain. But that underdevelopment is the reason why a child might see the same word 2 lines later after they just read it and completely forget what it is.
Mm,
And it's the same reason why they might get the first 2 letters of a word and have to guess at the rest, because their brain isn't putting letters and sounds together in a consistent way.
right. So many children, speaking of struggle, many children with dyslexia struggle in school despite being bright and
Mhm.
capable. Why does the traditional classroom environment often make learning harder for students with dyslexia?
That's a great question. I think that there are multiple challenges that are happening. One is actually the curriculum itself.
Mm,
So we do still have curriculums, and they're across the world. We work with clients globally, and so it's not just in the United States. This is actually happening in other places too.
right.
But kids are actually taught to look at the pictures and guess. And
Mm,
that's how we're going to read words. And so, especially if you have dyslexia, that strategy is going to completely break down for you because your brain can't put the letters and sounds together, even if you have pictures. So you can maybe guess at those, but then the pictures go away after third grade. And then you're left without the ability to decode words yourself. So that's a challenge for all kids. But kids with dyslexia specifically do require a very, very specific protocol in order to help their brain reconnect letters and sounds. And, in a survey that they did a couple of years ago, they asked teachers like how comfortable they felt teaching reading. And the statistics were actually quite horrible.
oh no.
90% of teachers said that they do not feel comfortable teaching reading, and only 10% said, yeah, this is actually a skill that I feel like I could do well.
Mm. So, what emotional or behavior patterns do you often see develop when kids aren't properly supported?
That's a great question. So I think most often we see that fall into one of three categories. So the first one I would say is anger or frustration. So these are typically happy-go-lucky kids who are all of a sudden throwing books, throwing pencils, having tantrums, melting down, having these very abnormal behaviors from what they would typically do. The second one that we see a lot is anxiety. So that can be just incredibly nervous, pulling out hair on their arms, pulling out hair in their heads, very nervous to go to school. I don't want to go there. I'm not getting out of the car. Please don't make me do that. I'm terrified to read in front of my peers, those kinds of things. So super anxious nervous system. And then the third one that we often see is like a depression or a withdrawing from things. So instead of volunteering, they'll withdraw and say, nope, I'm not going to participate. Instead of raising their hand in class, they stay silent. Instead
Mm,
of volunteering to be in this club or this group or, some even activities, they will withdraw. And a lot of that is because of the stories they're telling themselves about how they're not good enough and it would be too embarrassing and, a lot of that negative self-talk. So most often it fits into one of those three categories.
right. Thank you so very much for shedding light on that. You work at the intersection of neuroscience and education. Why has it been so difficult to apply neuroscience research in everyday classrooms?
That's a great question. There is a research and practice gap often, and sometimes that has nothing to do with the teacher's desire to want to embed neuroscience in their classroom, but oftentimes there is a standardized curriculum that must be used. And those things are often bureaucratic decisions. There's somebody at a higher level that's making the decision about what's going to get taught and in what order and at what time. And oftentimes that is not at the service of kids. And so that can be a challenge. Implementation science is tricky. You can have the resource in front of you, but if nobody actually coaches you on how to use it or how to use it to fidelity or what to do when the kid goes off script, um, there's obviously challenges in how that support is given. And I would say most often, kids just aren't given that one-on-one attention that they specifically need. So even within clients that we've seen that, two kids from the same family, both who have dyslexia, what it looks like for each one of them is so vastly different
Mhm.
that you really do have to do what's best for the child. And so I think it's challenging in a classroom of even 5 kids to try to meet the needs individually of every single one of those learners at
Mhm.
exactly the pace and the learning that they need.
The need, yeah. For parents listening who may be feeling overwhelmed or unsure, what are some practical ways parents can educate and empower themselves?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I do think that knowledge is so powerful. So, um, I think if I were in your shoes and you were trying to figure out, like, gosh, I'm seeing some signs, they're developing differently than my other children or than other children in their classroom, or I have some concerns, we've gone over this a million times, they just don't seem to be getting it. I would recommend that you either test for dyslexia or you screen. So the big difference there is that if you get a full-blown dyslexia assessment, it can be very expensive. You can be on a 6-month plus wait list, but it can be very valuable to find out, for sure if that's what your child's dealing with. Oftentimes they're testing other things, are there working memory challenges, ADHD? Is there anything else that's making learning difficult for your child? But on the opposite side, you can do something like a simple dyslexia screen. And we do those often within our company where you just do a few brief assessments to see where the child falls relative to their peers. We triangulate and do 3 different data points to say, how are these looking and how does that compare to my child's intelligence? And those things can really empower you to learn more about not only what dyslexia looks like, the sign and symptoms, but what your own child's data is. And I think that that is just incredibly valuable because with that information, you're now equipped to do something about it or to know what next steps might be the most appropriate.
Right. Speaking of empowerment, educating themselves, what questions should parents be asking schools or specialists to advocate effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So oftentimes, parents don't know what materials their child's being supported with, so maybe you go to the school conferences and you find out that your child isn't performing where they're supposed to be. Maybe they recommend that your child gets additional help or, hey, we're going to pull them out of the classroom. We're going to give them these minutes. I would want to know, what are you doing and with what?
Yeah.
So, like how many minutes are they spending? How many other kids are in the classroom? What are the skill level of those other kids? What curriculum are you using? Is that research based? Is that, what skills specifically? How are you measuring whether or not my child's growing? So, I mean, I can't even tell you how many people we've had say, my kid wasted so many hours of their human life in a
Mm,
room that was trying to help them, but it was very, very unclear what
mhm,
the goals, what the data, what the curriculum even was. And it was almost just like a glorified study time.
mm,
So I think if I were in your shoes, I would want to know as much information as possible
yeah.
about my child's performance, what they're
Yeah.
using, how they're progressing, those types of things.
Yeah. It's very important. And this is one of my favorite parts of this conversation. When dyslexia is properly supported, especially by addressing how the brain hears and responds to language, what other changes do you often see?
Oh, I love this question too. So I'll just give you a specific example. So we had a 10-year-old boy in our program, Caleb. Caleb had multiple diagnoses. He has autism, he has dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. And so there were a lot of beliefs that others had about what Caleb could accomplish and what he was going to become in his life. And his mother was a real champion for Caleb and who he could become, even though other
Love
people
that.
had put limits on who he was going to be or what he could achieve or what he could accomplish. She did not. And she was
Profound.
giving up at nothing to really help him to become his best self. And so she dug in and she helped him get neurological support and connecting letters and sounds. And 4.5 months later, he's reading at the 79th percentile. He can't put
Oh,
down books. He is volunteering in class. He's got more peers because he feels more comfortable and more confident about himself. She said it changed everything for him. And so I really think that when you couple the fact that these kids are highly creative, they're great problem solvers, they're great puzzlers, they're great thinkers,
mhm.
and then you tie that together with, oh my goodness, now this child has the ability to read and spell. It's really unlimited possibility. And you open the doors for what they can become. But it's really oftentimes taking an advocate or someone who is unwilling to accept this narrative that it has to be less than to kind of push that to the next level.
Oh my goodness, I love that you shed so much light on this story. Because my next question was going to be, do things like confidence, anxiety, or behavior begin to shift as well? But
Oh,
that
big time.
example you gave, oh my gosh, I'm just like, I love it. I'm getting the chills right now. And thanks to the parent who believed in her child that, yes, he can do better. Yes, like focusing on his strength and not what he could not do. I just
Yes.
love that.
And also, just being willing to challenge the current thoughts. And
Mhm.
that's not easy. I mean, as a
Not
parent, you don't want to go into the meeting and be the squeaky wheel
right,
and find
right.
challenges. But if people are not supporting your child, if you don't feel
Mhm.
like they're getting the education or the care that they need or that they
Yes,
deserve, then you have to be the squeaky wheel, in my opinion, because
yeah.
you believe that they are capable of more, and it's not okay that they're not getting it.
Yeah, sometimes we have to be our children's best
Yes,
advocate, because,
yes, that's right.
and as we begin to wrap up, what's one message one parent to walk away with today?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I think trust yourself.
Trust
Trust
yourself.
that you know your child the best. And even though you might go to your pediatrician and they might say, nah, there's nothing wrong, or you might have the teacher at school say, nah, this is fine, they'll grow out of it, or, anybody else who might try to give you advice on whether or not your child is struggling or if they've got issues, I would just encourage you. I mean, I
Mhm.
have yet to meet a parent who had a sneaking suspicion that something was wrong who was
Yeah.
wrong.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
are always correct. And
Mhm.
so I think the biggest message that I could share is to just trust yourself. If you
Trust
have a sneaking
yourself.
suspicion, follow that intuition until you get an answer.
Oh, I love that because my follow-up question or thought was going to be, especially parents who may be questioning themselves or feeling afraid to take the next step.
Right.
So I love how you said to trust ourselves. And I want to know, where can listeners find you after the show? Do you have any websites, any links that you on social media you can feel free to drop them up and I will put that in the show notes.
Perfect. So I think probably the best one-stop shop is to go to drrebeccatroy.com. On that site, you will see links to a screener. So if you want to find out if that's exactly what your child's dealing with, there is the opportunity to do that there. We've got all kinds of case study reviews that will share hope and inspiration about what's possible when your child gets the right support. And then also links to all of our other social channels are on there as well. So I think that's the best one-stop shop.
Oh, I love that. Dr. Troy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your heart, and your advocacy with us today. Your work reminds us that dyslexia is not a limitation, it's a difference that deserves understanding, compassion, and the right support.
Thank you.
For our listeners, I'll be sure to link Dr. Troy's work and resources in the show notes. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with another parent, educator, or caregiver who might need this reminder. You're not imagining it. Your child isn't broken, and support is available. Until next time, this is Heart to Heart with Abagaba. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this space with us on Heart to Heart with Abagaba. I hope this conversation inspired you to keep moving forward in hope and light. If this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone you love. Leave us a review and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment of inspiration, connection, and joy. May your home be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your spirit with the quiet strength of love. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and keep celebrating the love that makes us family.